Coming in hot, I'm your host and captain of the Reason to Reason podcast, Sal Galati. We're going to do something a little bit different. You're just going to get a taste, a dose of reason. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil in a superlative degree of comparison only. So starting off the show a little different with a quote from the opening of A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. I was going to do an episode on the French Revolution, and there's going to be some of that in here. There's going to be just a ranting and raving all over the place, seemingly, episode, kind of how my mind jumps around. I'm going to just be myself here today. There's a lot going on, and honestly, a lot of lies being revealed, and a lot of hypocrisies that are being exposed, and I'm loving it, quite frankly, because there's some of these things, once you see them, you can't unsee them. Tale of Two Cities. This was written talking about London and Paris in the time period before the French Revolution, leading to the French Revolution, and during. And the French Revolution is interesting, and it's different than the revolution that happened in America. I would argue the American Revolution was fed by the Great Awakening, which was a turning of the people to the gospel. It was based in a biblical principle in this sense, that people were pursuing liberty, then that they knew their rights came from God. The French Revolution was completely atheistic. So people try to draw the two together as if they were connected. They were connected, but the motivators of the French Revolution and the drivers of it were completely different. And we had a tale of two cities, right? So in France, you had the people that had everything, the noblemen and the king. This is the famous let them eat cake, when Marie Antoinette found out that the peasants were starving. Now, whether that was a true statement or not, I mean, history is clouded. We don't really know. I mean, whether they were just evil people that were exploiting the poor, I would argue they had no clue what was going on. And she was living in a fantasy world in her own city. But I would argue that there's people today that are living in a fantasy world in their own city, leading me to what's going on in D.C., which D.C., what's going to happen there is really the blueprint for going to all of our major cities and cleaning out the rot, the crime. I heard from police 10, 15 years ago, they said, Sal, look, if they let us do our job for about a week, we'd have crime down 90%. And it's absolutely true. Look what happened in D.C. all of a sudden. You have a tale of two cities. You have people complaining that DC's under lockdown and they shouldn't do this. Mainly white liberals who don't live in the communities being affected by the crime. And then you have people that have lived in DC for a long time, black people. I don't even like using these terms, right? But all the people that the white liberals cherish and present as their sacred cow, they're going around, hey, Trump, thanks for making it allowable for me to stop at a red light with my windows down, not getting carjacked. This is Stephen Miller, one of Trump's advisors, telling it like it is.
And for too long, 99% of this city has been terrorized by 1% of this city. And the voices that you hear out there, those crazy communists, they have no roots. They have no connections to the city. They have no families they are raising in this city. They have no one that they are sending to school in this city. They have no jobs in this city. They have no connections to this community at all. But they're the ones who've been advocating for the 1%, the criminals, the killers, the rapists, the drug dealers. We are not going to let the communists destroy a great American city, let alone the nation's capital. All these demonstrators that you've seen out here in recent days, all of these elderly white hippies, they're not part of the city and never have been. And by the way, most of the citizens who live in Washington, D.C. are black. This is not a city that has had any safety for its black citizens for generations. And President Trump is the one who is fixing that. So we're going to ignore these stupid white hippies that all need to go home and take a nap because they're all over 90 years old. And we're going to get back to the business of protecting the American people and the citizens of Washington, D.C.
And he said it, and that's the truth of the matter. I see these protests. Look at the protests going on, all these kings protests and no kings. This is who it is. Tale of Two Cities. The people suffering the consequences of the moronic policies are not the ones protesting what's going on in D.C. They're embracing it. They're celebrating it, and they're thanking Trump for it. The people that are protesting are the people that don't have to deal with the consequences. It's the elitist mentality. They've never been out of their little bubble. So Tale of Two Cities as far as crime. No one could even believe the crime statistics. It's the same thing like the labor statistics. They attacked Trump for replacing the person who heads up the labor statistics. Well, because they were wrong for 4 years. I mean, the adjustments were out of whack. And then right before the election, to make Kamala look good, they made it seem like the jobs were doing good when they weren't. So let's go to geopolitics. Let's go to what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. And Trump, on the verge of solving this thing and getting this thing to stop. Now, I love it that all the criticisms coming from all the warmongers, all the people for 15, 20 years, all they brought us is war and destruction. All the geniuses. They got it all figured out what they're due, how to solve it. And meanwhile, he comes on the stage and he starts dealing with it. Remember Nord Stream 2? This was like 3-4 years ago. It was a pipeline that actually Trump advocated against because he's like, well, Europe, we're funding you militarily to protect you from Russia, supposedly. Meanwhile, you're giving them tons of money through this pipeline. What are we doing? That you're going to completely be compromised if something happens here. Well, it exploded. A bomb happened there. And the media tried to convince us that Russia did it, which made no sense at all. Why would Russia cut their own pipeline where they're making millions of dollars every day? Why would they cut that? Well, turns out, here we go. I mean, who knows what really happened, but the Russians didn't do it. But now it's Ukrainian man arrested over 2022 attack on Nord Stream gas pipelines. All right. Well, was it the Russians? I mean, we're in a war, quite frankly, with them by proxy, right? We're funding the people they're at war with. When you have the Russia collusion line, all this junk, all this garbage, and look where it leads us. And now you got Bolton, who was a security advisor for Donald Trump, nothing but a guy that always wanted to get into a war. Well, now they're raiding his joint because it looks like maybe he had some information he shouldn't have taken with him. So all these guys that get interviewed and they get paid to be experts and just hate on Trump, and all they do, all their consult, all their advice is to brainwash the hippie screaming in D.C. that D.C. is under attack by the federal government when all they're trying to do is eliminate crime so people can live freely and operate. Those same people are the ones that buy into the lie that Putin is the enemy of the world and we have to destroy him and go to nuclear holocaust. Tale of Two Cities. So, look at the gerrymandering. I did the episode on that. The reason why the blue states are so freaking out about this is because they can't even gerrymander their states anymore. They're so out of whack, there's nothing left. There's an expression like in business, like squeezing the blood out of a rock. When you're trying to squeeze every little drop out of a business, there's nothing left. And that's why they're freaking out. And the other thing they're freaking out about is getting these census straightened out, where we're not counting people that aren't citizens in our determination of how many seats each state gets. You don't believe me? Yeah? All right, then check this out. Here's a California state senator that was part of a hearing on redistricting in California, and he said they have to redraw the California maps because illegal aliens won't be included in the census, which will cause them to have no democracy left. Listen to this guy. Looks like one of these guys who thinks he's real smart is wearing a bow tie and glasses.
Doesn't become the case. If if a year from now, or a month from now, or if a week from now, if your cousin is kidnapped off the street, if UCLA closes down, if we announce that there won't be an election, if the census that we're relying on for the commission's next stab at redistricting doesn't include 1.5 million Californians in it, if we have no democracy left and we look back and said, if only we could have done something.
Here's the truth of the matter. There's 50, 60 seats that are in the wrong party's hands. And I'm not advocating for a Republican Party per se, because not all the Republicans are fantastic either. But this whole idea of democracy, who's really been opposed to democracy? Tale of Two Cities. So Trump got elected to stop crime. He's doing it, and they're fighting him every tooth and nail. Trump got elected to close the border. He did it. Trump got elected to get rid of criminal people that aren't citizens of this country. He's doing it. Trump got elected to stop the conflict in Ukraine and Russia and all the money that we squander over there when our roads are pothole ridden and our bridges are collapsing. He's in the process of doing it. It's find it interesting. The EU and all those hotshots came over, and the Macron and all these. They insult Trump and they treat him like he's a moron. They come over and now they're all humble and meek. I find it interesting. All of a sudden, when Trump says, you know what, you guys are going to have to start paying for this. Then all of a sudden, peace. We need peace. This must stop. This must stop. You guys notice how the tone changes when they know that the money's drying up? You guys find that curious? These people don't care about how many people died. Probably over 1 million people have died over there for nothing. And all it was when the money was flowing, let it flow. Tale of Two Cities. Let's go modern time on what was happening in the French Revolution. And I might just do a whole episode on the French Revolution, but it was interesting because it was so out of whack. The balance was so out of whack. The king and the queen were living in just lavish conditions. They could eat whatever they want. They had everything that they needed. I mean, I read that Marie Antoinette had like a fantasy dairy farm where she could pretend to be a dairy farmer. Anyway, many of the peasants and the people that weren't part of the royalty were dying. They had no food and not living well. This is where the expression "let them eat cake" comes from. Because she was so out of tune with reality. They said they can't find bread. They said, well, let them eat cake instead. Well, what we're seeing in our streets slowly is, we had that kid that shot the CEO of healthcare insurance company. We had the shooter that killed the executive of BlackRock. People are upset because there is an imbalance. We are living in two cities. People that are getting really hammered. We talked about inflation and how inflation doesn't hurt the guy with assets. It hurts the guy with nothing. And people are getting disgruntled. The kids are getting disgruntled. And they don't see anyone really advocating for them. Now, Trump is advocating for them. But the media is so warped that they can't see it. And what's happening is they're going to take matter in their own hands. And we don't want that. That's what the French Revolution was about. And it led to a lot of people dying and a lot of people being killed. It got more and more violent as people started seeing the violence in the street. And we need to avoid that. We need to give people hope that there is justice, that people that committed crimes will be prosecuted, will go to jail. Not only crime in the streets, the white-collar crime and the treason that happened in our higher echelons of government, lying about Russia collusion, producing fake information to implicate a president colluding with Russia. The way it tore the country apart, people need to be held accountable. People need to see it. So how are we serving our kids? So the same white hippie liberals screaming in D.C., they're the same ones behind the policies that led to this tragedy. Take a listen.
In some ways, Alicia Ortiz is living an American dream. The 19-year-old began her freshman year at the University of Connecticut in Hartford this fall. She's excited to study public policy. Even today, could you read this, or would it take you a long time?
It's impossible. I just see his words everywhere.
Alicia graduated from the Hartford public school system last year, but she says today she is illiterate. She still doesn't know how to read or write. When she was in early education,
They would just either tell me to sit in a corner and sleep or just draw pictures, flowers for them.
So this is the education system that we're told we're racist and hateful if we try to reform it. These are the people they say that they care. So this is a tragedy. These kids are not served well by these policies. And the people that actually care about them are called racist. Now, another thing that came to mind is STEM. And we were pushing STEM over the last 10, 15, 20 years in replacement of logic, reason, critical thinking. STEM, learn to code, that's the future. Now, we used to teach our kids logic and reason. We don't do it anymore. Now we teach them how to code. So we've taught them how to code because the future's in coding. We need people that code. They exploited these kids. Now we got a bunch of people that code, and their jobs are being replaced by the machines they created through their coding. So those jobs will completely disappear. Now they're left with what? They know how to code, which is an antiquated skill, but they don't know how to logic and reason. And they produce the machine through their coding that can logic and reason, that they'll be reliant on to think, to operate, to interact with the world. And it's just really sinister. I mean, none of this is planned out by any one human being, but I think there is a master plan. And that plan is really fascinating when you think about it. And this leads to kind of the weak arguments that you see. And this is why censorship was so big, because they couldn't argue about the facts of the matter. They had to just censor people. When we look at the COVID vaccine now, the CDC has come out and said, kids it's not necessary for them to get the COVID booster. So this is a CNN article. In break with current CDC recommendations, leading pediatrics group recommends COVID-19 shots for young children. Does anyone believe this? And I remember when, we were dealing with this thing 5-6 years ago, and they would, this group, the American Academy of Pediatrics, would be cited. Well, they said this and they said that. I'm like, who cares? And then I would look up their website, and they also had guidance on trans things for kids. It's all garbage. And how much more do you have to see that it's garbage? Do you want to give does anyone, even people that got the shot before, and I'm not criticizing you, there was a lot of propaganda to get healthy people to take a shot they didn't need. I'm not judging you. I'm not criticizing you. But does anyone at this juncture, on what they know, think that this is necessary? So the American Academy of Pediatrics released its updated recommendation for vaccine on Tuesday, including COVID-19 shots for infants and young children, a break from the current U.S. for Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommendations. CDC before, when the pandemic was going on, it was under the control of the liars. Yeah, we got to do this. We got to, do what the CDC said. The CDC said. Now don't listen to the CDC. Now we listen to the American Academy of Pediatrics. Which one is it? We need real scientists back in the CDC, not politicians. If you haven't seen that it was run by politicians, people that had no concern for truth, only greed, money, and power, I don't know how else to help you. So I send that to my friend, actually, that we went back and forth over the years on this thing. He's a doctor. And I just asked him. I mean, he knows I'm right at this point. But I asked him, what do you think? Who's right here? Is it Kennedy, who we had called a quack 4 or 5 years ago? Or is it the American Academy of Pediatrics? Who should I listen to? Tale of Two Cities. And speaking of trans kids, I was, you see these bumper stickers, protect trans kids, and it made me think, protect them from who? Is there anyone out there with a vendetta for trans kids? No one wants to hurt the trans kids. Are you implying you want to protect them from me, who says that they need kind of help, but it's not kind of help you're offering them? Or do they need protection from someone who thinks that they need to be medicated for the rest of their life, subjected to all kinds of terrible procedures and drugs in order to feel happy? There's going to be another Tale of Two Cities. When these kids 10, 15 years later, after what we allowed to happen to them, come and go, why did you let me do that? You think they're going to be upset? So I don't really blame the people. I mean, they've been so subjugated to a bunch of garbage. Colbert, we just announced that his show's going to be canceled. Why? Because nobody watches it, and they spend $40 million a year to produce nothing but hatred. I saw him screaming about Kennedy and Kennedy's decision to stop the mRNA technology, and he's saying that he's going to kill people, and he's throwing up his middle finger on TV and saying F you. It's so childish and bizarre. And these are supposedly like the brainiacs leading. I'm supposed to listen to him. I'm a buffoon because I voted for Trump. He's the smart guy. So back to the French Revolution. I've been reading on it and found a documentary done by the History Channel, and I watched it, and I'm starting to see a narrative that was kind of being shaped. And the thing about the French Revolution is like different sides of the ideological spectrum claim it and try to revise the history to kind of fit their narrative of how they think the world should work. And that's fine, and that happens, and and it's what I'm trying to communicate to you as you watch these things and learn and see things. I just saw the narrative shaping, so I decided to look up the various historians that they presented as experts. All clean-cut individuals, appear to be high intellectual beings. And to a T, I mean, they were all on the left. A lot of them affiliated with Marxist, openly communist organizations. A lot of them vocally hating Trump. It just became clear, there's a narrative to everything, so just be discerning. And nothing against the French Revolution per se. I mean, it's complicated. Obviously there was a corrupt monarchy that needed to be replaced. Things needed to be done, but the way they went about it, again, because it was atheistically driven, the outcomes weren't ultimately good, and I don't think anyone would argue with that. Let's see some things that happened during the French Revolution. The destroying of statues. Do you remember the Summer of Love? This isn't a new thing. You have to destroy the past, destroy everything that people know, unmoor them from their history, from their roots, to make everything in your own image. But unfortunately, people that tend to destroy, destructive people, usually are not very good at building. There was a void left. There was nothing to replace what they tore down because, unfortunately, they didn't think that far ahead, unlike the American Revolution, where they had some principles founded in the Bible that they were ready to replace the monarchy with. Churches were destroyed. The desecrating of the tombs of kings, just complete lack of respect for anything, even human beings. They developed the year zero. They were going to reform the calendar. They changed the names of the months. Everything was upside down. They developed a new religion called the Cult of Reason, an atheistic religion, really incoherent. They said they valued reason, but nothing they did was reasonable or logical. Think like in recent history when, people started worshiping the science. Science says, science says, science says. And I just went through the COVID vaccine for children especially. It wasn't necessary. It never was. It was evident it wasn't necessary. And all the people screaming about trust the science were yelling at the people that were using reason. I don't care what you say or what religion you try to impose on me with your worship of science, but this doesn't make sense to me. The king was found guilty of being a king. That's what his crime was. So whether he was a good king or a bad king or whether it was right or not, but he had no choice. And honestly, when he was going to be killed, history tells us he was quite forgiving of the people and really had a heart for them and what was going to happen once this went down. And when he was trying to speak, they would just play the drum so no one could hear him. I liken this to like people inherently are racist just because they're white. It doesn't matter if you do anything racist or not, you're just racist because you're white. So you got quite a paradox here, because you have a society that essentially said, hey, the people in charge don't deserve it. They're not competent and they're not capable. And we want a meritocracy. We want to be led by the people that are most competent. Fair, great, wonderful. Unfortunately, because it was driven by atheistic motives, it never coalesced and it never really produced that fruit like it did in the American Revolution, where we do have a merit-based society here. There, instead, it became whoever could consolidate power and convince the people to side with them and kill their opponents. Because the movement was never really coherent. It was a bunch of different, just disgruntled groups. All they knew is they didn't like what was before. I mentioned this before, a monarchy is not necessarily bad, right? It's the best form of government. The problem is you just need a good king. And unfortunately, there's no man that could fit that role. This is why in the gospel message that the king that will be in the new kingdom is God himself, a perfect king. But we don't have a perfect king. But this fight against the monarchy per se was just like, whatever, replace it with anything. We just want something different. And we see a similar thing in our country too. People just, they think they've been given a raw deal because our system has been corrupt. And the people trying to fix it and restore it and get the people to be able to read and live in safe cities and stop spending money on wars and spend it at home, they're villainized and they're presented to the people that are getting screwed by all the bad policies as the racist person that's keeping them down. People are getting wise to it. But this is why you see these fractured groups in the street. Free Palestine, global warming, trans rights. Somehow they're all marching for the same thing. It makes no sense. Other than they're all aligned in one enemy. But once they get power, same thing will happen. They'll start cutting each other down. They want the power. They were just using the other people to get their power. This is why you're seeing this merger between Marxism and Islamism. The connection is that both hate the Judeo-Christian West. They hate the American experiment. They hate freedom of speech. They hate the rights that we have enshrined by our Constitution. They want power controlled, consolidated into very few hands, and tell us how to live. Obviously, on social issues, they have very little in common, if nothing at all. But they're using each other. And we'll see who gets the raw end of the deal, who's going to get the guillotine. Either, I would imagine the Islamists are going to start cutting off and paring back the Marxists once they get in charge, or maybe vice versa. But what we saw in the French Revolution will happen here, because unlike the American Revolution, where it was rooted in something bigger than them, God and truth, this revolution, both the French and what's happening in this country, are not rooted in that. It's rooted in self. And self-promoted ideas and self-grandizement. And so let's look today. We have a merit-based society, and we're trying to fight the other way. A tale of two cities, right? The paradox. We have judges that don't know the law. We have statisticians that don't know statistics and report bad labor statistics, bad crime statistics. We have generals that never fought in war or even operated military equipment calling the shots. And here's an example of the godlessness of it. I mentioned a guillotine, and I want you to get a taste for like the mindset of the historians in this episode.
New killing machine takes center stage in Paris. Physician-inventor Joseph Ignace Guillotin devises a ruthless beheading machine, turning old-fashioned decapitation into a humanitarian experience.
The French revolutionaries believe in humane values. They believe that unnecessary suffering should not be caused. And what they like about the guillotine is that it is quick, it's efficient, and as far as we can tell, although no one has returned to tell the tale, it's painless.
So that was one of the seemingly impartial historians just spouting the truth, glorifying the guillotine. It might have been a more ethical way to kill people, but it killed a lot of people, and it probably killed a lot of people that shouldn't have been killed, and he seemed giddy about it. Just an example of the reframing of history. The guillotine was a horrible thing that happened. A lot of innocent people were killed. It was a thirsty device and its quench for blood never ended, and it dehumanized people, and it made people glorify to death. There was bloodlust in Paris when the guillotine was rolling during the revolution. So can you trust anybody's history? No. I mean, you got to discern, you got to look, and you got to think for yourself and reason. And I'm just sharing these things for you to think about. Tale of Two Cities. You know, as I think about it, what has Trump come to really do? He says he was going to close the border. Most people are fans of that, and it seems to be working and doing well. He wants the cities to be rid of crime. Everyone's on board with that and seems to be doing well. He wants jobs to be back in this country. He wants our children to be educated appropriately so they could read and not get into college without being able to read. He wants opportunity. He wants safety. He wants peace in the world. He wants wars to end, and he's ended many. How could it be that he's such an evil man? How could it be that so many people are voting for him that don't look like him? And they're supposedly people that he hates because he's racist. It's a tale of two cities. It's lies. It's lies. I'll leave you with the quote. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. Incredulity is disbelief. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope. It was the winter of despair. We had everything before us. We had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven. We were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received, for good or for evil, in a superlative degree of comparison only. Trump's not the Messiah. He's not going to save the world. He's also not doing all the bad things that the media is telling you he's doing. And I think people are getting wise to it. Don't believe the superlatives in the media. It's just getting there to be stupid and watch it all day long. Start thinking for yourself. Seek the truth. Peace.
Sing it!
Thanks for joining us for another episode. I hope I got you thinking and out of your comfort zone. Believe me, the biggest fear your government has is a population that is thinking and talking to one another. So get out there, take a risk, start a conversation, make a friend, and reason with each other. Share the show with someone who you think needs to hear it. I wish you peace and love.